Welcome to On the Real Side. And I'm Bob Mover. Today we have a very special guest. We always have wonderful guests, but our wonderful guest today is a very great saxophone player, tenor player named Jerry Weldon, who's going to discuss music and life and all of these very interesting things with a very interesting man. So I'm very happy. Hi, Jerry.
Hi, Bob. It's great to be with you.
Great to have you, man. And, before I start, I might as well do this first. We do this as a labor of love. Jesse Kaiser and I, Jesse is our producer. And so it helps us a lot if you enjoy our show, if you give us a like and subscribe. It costs nothing to subscribe, and you get a few perks like notifications and contact with us if you want to say something. We'll have that for subscribers, even for non-subscribers. But we found out, we did a little look at our analytics, and we have good news that a couple of weeks ago, 85% of our viewers were not subscribed. But as of yesterday, we checked it out, and now 50% of our viewers are subscribed, which is sort of cause for celebration. But it would really be more of a cause for celebration if you all could subscribe to us, because I'm not sure how everything works, all the machinations of the internet and everything. But I'm told that we are trying to monetize this, our podcast, and do what's necessary to have some kind of income to sustain us, because it's very time consuming, taking care of doing the show, and for Jesse doing finding all the pictures and the photos and and me too. I do background on everybody. So to make a long story short, we'd really appreciate it if you would like us and click on like and subscribe. It just takes a click or two, and it helps everybody a lot. On that note, we will introduce ourselves to Jerry Weldon. I first heard Jerry at a jam session, a long time ago, like maybe 15, 20 years ago even, at a place called Cleopatra's Needle that had these sessions that started about 1 a.m, and I think it was 1 to 3 or something. And Jerry came in, and I think I told him that I had enjoyed his playing, and that he had brought some memories of my good friend Sal Nistico back to me in some of the way that he was playing the tenor. Remember that?
I do. I do remember that.
Yeah, and Jerry has that kind of a deep swing. If you haven't heard him, we have a discography. You can look him up and find that out. But he's got a big tone and a deep swing, and all of those beautiful values that are in this music. So on that, for Jerry, let's talk about some influences. When did you first start to get interested in jazz?
Teenager, high school, 14, 15 years old, around that time. My father was a big fan. He wasn't a musician, but he was a big jazz fan, and he had a really great record collection. So I got into the records around 14, 15, and the saxophone was really spoke to me. So I wanted
that's when you started to play at 13, 14?
Yeah, I started playing at age 14 in high school. You mentioned baseball. I liked to play baseball before that, in sports. I was into sports, but I wasn't very good. But I was a big sports fan, still am, And
yeah,
then,
me too.
And then I got into. Then I got into his very hip record collection, the music really spoke to me. And
That's interesting. So, so then you got a saxophone. You started to.
I wanted to sound like Stan Getz. That was the first guy. That was the first guy that really that came out of those speakers. That cool sound that he had. You know.
Me too, man.
And
My first influence was Lester Young. I heard Lester,
yeah.
and then when I heard Stan, I realized, it was wonderful that somebody that you could be white and Jewish and
Yes.
and still be able to hang with those with the music. So
Exactly.
that was a big revelation. Then I got to meet Stan and stuff, and that's all in my book. That was
No, I've heard you tell that story, and it was in Florida, right? You met him in
yeah,
Florida. Yeah.
yeah. He liked to be based in Miami.
He gave you a read.
Yeah, after he played the concert, I told him I had told him I was skipping school. I was in 7th grade.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'd never played the saxophone. I was trying to play drums, and I didn't have the coordination to do that.
Right.
Same as I didn't have coordination. I would have been an athlete if I'd have been able to be any good at it, like you.
If you were any good, yeah.
Yeah. So you and I shared that, right? Like a love of sports
Yeah.
and an inability to coordinate well enough.
Exactly.
So having to do something, and wow, I didn't see already we have that in common.
Yep.
So Stan, I got to meet him. I came in the daytime. My mother had this idea that I should tell them. My mother was a very a fine singer and a great person with a lot of problems. And
Yeah.
one of her gifts was she was a fantastic liar.
Oh, okay.
She was really good at those kind of things. So she said, what you do is tell them you're from a school newspaper, because it was a concert at Dade Junior College.
Yeah.
And so he was doing an 11 o'clock in the morning concert, and then another night at 9 o'clock. Yeah, and to see Stan at 9
And this would have been what year would this would have been? What year would this?
Exactly 1965.
Wow.
It was September 23rd.
He was a star. I mean, he was always a star, but I mean, he had those, the bossa nova thing.
The bossa nova had just come out.
Was still very hot.
He was there. His quartet was Roy Haynes.
Wow.
And Steve Swallow and Gary Burton.
Yeah.
Were both relatively unknown at that time. They both had a couple of gigs, in the public eye. Steve with Art Farmer and stuff. But I didn't know any of that, and I came there, and then I came early. And as I came in, it was just that Stan hadn't arrived yet. But I started talking to Gary and Roy actually showed me about the ride cymbal. I said I was playing drums. And I asked, there's something you can show me. And he gave me a little thing of how don't go ding, ding, and ding all the time. Sometimes just play quarter notes, ding, 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 ding.
Right.
Which was very nice. A little drum
very good advice.
From Roy Haynes,
From Roy Haynes,
so then I went out for them. I didn't have the money to get them coffee, but they gave me money. And I went to the cafeteria to buy some coffee and donuts while they set up. And when I came back, Stan was there. And he had his horn out. And I had told them how I knew Stan's solos, and I could sing a lot of his solos, on the records. I could sing along with them. And Stan was playing The Shadow of Your Smile, which was a brand new tune.
Brand new song. Exactly.
Had just come out.
Yes.
And I still remember how he played. He went da 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 dee da dee dee da 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 dee da dee da dee da. That little lick ball, but dee da dee da dee da.
You remember what key it was in?
Yeah, he was playing it in. Well, I don't have perfect pitch.
Yeah.
But I really believe he was playing it in E minor.
The regular, the original
key it's in.
The original key.
Yeah, I think he was playing it.
Yeah.
It was warm up. He was warming up by playing a melody.
Sure.
Which later I thought was interesting because Jim Hall once told me that if you listen to how somebody warms up, you can tell a lot about them.
Yeah.
Because that's another story. But I want to talk
about story. Sure.
But anyway, so I got those tunes. I mean, I told Stan they wouldn't let me sit in the front. It was all booked for faculty and students, and they were going to put me way in the back. And I said to Stan, Stan said, so you're the kid who knows my solos.
Yeah.
And, like you're the kid. And I said, yeah. He said, sing me one. So I went, ba da ba da beep ba 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 da beep ba da ba da remember the solo?
Hershey bar, Hershey bar, Hershey bar.
Right, and Hershey bar, Johnny Mandel too. The solo that he played was
Yeah.
etc. So I sang the solo for him, and he said, "Damn, you do know my solos." I said, "Yeah," and he said, well, "Have you heard Mickey One yet?" And I said, "No, I haven't, but I got Focus.
Oh,
I
that
can sing all of Focus, which was
right.
he did with strings."
Sure.
And
I have Focus. I have those Hershey, those are those the Roost records, the Hershey bar, and he plays He plays a beautiful introduction on Yesterdays, and he
yeah,
plays
well,
Gone
I
with
had
the
Hershey
Wind.
Bar
Gone
on
with
it.
the Wind is on there. I think Roy Haynes is on
He's
both of
on
those.
some of it. On Hershey Bar, I think it might be Walter Bolden.
Oh, well, that's right.
Because that was with the Horace Silver.
Strike Up the Band. Strike Up
well, that and
Tootsie Roll.
Tootsie Roll and Wildwood.
Wildwood, Gigi Grice, a couple of Gigi Grice.
And Rubberneck.
Yeah.
Greg Russellino tune, and then also Split Kick.
Split Kick, which is another you.
Another you. So, there was I picked it up for 79 cents in the supermarket, and it was called A Pair of Kings.
Oh, I remember that. I remember that cover.
With the two cards on the cover, right?
Yes.
Yeah, that was the Stan Getz, Horace Silver, A Pair of Kings. And, that was actually Horace's first record.
I know.
I was told,
He picked up that whole rhythm section up in Connecticut. He hired them all.
That's right. It was Horace.
He hired them all on the spot. And
right, Walter Bolden,
Joe Galloway.
Joe Galloway. Was that Joe Galloway? No, is that a different name? Joe, you're close. Maybe I knew Joe Galloway as a drummer. I'm just thinking. Maybe it was Joe Galloway.
It was Horace.
Yeah, and the bassist, I don't remember his name.
They were the house rhythm section.
Yeah, they were the house rhythm section. But anyway, this was, so I said to Stan, they're not letting me sit in the front. And, he said, well, you know what? It's very hot in here. It was like in the gymnasium or one of those places.
Yeah.
It wasn't a concert hall, but it was a university makeshift concert hall. He said, I sweat a lot when I play. What if you sat on the stage with us in the corner?
Wow.
And you get a towel, and when I signal you, you just come up and hand me the towel. You come from back,
Nice.
So he let me sit on the stage with the band.
Yeah. You had to come off the bench.
I have to come off the bench and come in and hand him the towel. I was like, like being a water boy for a football team or something.
Exactly.
Or a baseball boy. So there I was. And the audience was there, and I was there, and Stan was beckoning.
And Stan was nice. He was nice to you. Man.
He was very nice. And
nice bunch of guys.
A nice bunch of guys, as dude said. Well, I got to know more of Stan too.
Yeah.
But we, as the story goes, I'm not going to tell that long story, but it was quite an involved story. But the part of this story of my first read was basically what happened was I went that night. Stan asked me. He put his horn in the closet after the morning concert. And he brought me to the press conference with him. And people would ask him, Mr. Getz, is this one of your children? And when he said no, but he's a good friend, and we had
nice.
And I thought that was so nice that he'd say that.
That was real nice.
Yeah. So then he said, "Could you watch my horn? Make sure nobody tries to get it, because I'm going to put it in this closet, and the closet's locked, but you never know,
Yeah.
So I stood in front of that closet, and the closet fortunately was near the cafeteria, so every once in a while I'd run and grab a meatball sandwich. But I was there standing guard like the Prussian guard for the next 6 hours. And then he came back at night and let me sit on the stage again. And then at the end of the concert, I said, Mr. Getz, I think I want to start playing the saxophone. And I thought it might be a good omen to have a reed from you. And he took off the reed that he had been playing that night. And he handed it to me with a reed cover. He slipped it into one of those cardboard reed covers.
Yep.
And said, here's your reed. And
what was it?
Oh yeah, it was a number 4.5 Rico.
Wow.
The brown box Ricos, right?
Yeah, sure.
I remember he had the brown box of reeds there.
Sure.
Sure. And he, I went the next day to my friend Kenny White's, who had a tenor, and I told him, I was going to start playing, and could I try his horn? I'd never played a saxophone before, so he showed me how to hold it and how to put the reed on. He put the reed on for me, and he saw the reed, and he kind of chuckled, but he hadn't been playing that long. I came out, and I'll never forget the first thing I ever played on the saxophone. I put on the reed, and I went, and nothing came out but air.
No,
Just a whole bunch of air.
no. They
And I
say,
still,
yeah, they said he played a hard. The guys used to say they played a hard reed, man.
well, it was a very hard reed, especially if you've never played a horn.
No,
And
that's
I think
crazy.
it gave me a certain memory of that's where I'm coming from. Every time I play, where I started was and no sound. Anything I get out of the horn, I'm happy.
Yeah. Everything else is a bonus.
Right, everything else is a bonus. And then Kenny handed me a number 2 reed, which is what he was playing, and and I had a whole, then I got a sound.
Yeah. You had a little bit of a shot.
Yeah, and that's how I began playing. But so when you played, did you have a teacher or what?
Oh yeah, I had a teacher. I went once a week to the music store, Al Marino's music store on Hillside Avenue in Williston Park, Long Island. And this guy was an old school, big tone. He sounded like Coleman Hawkins, and Jess Marino was his name. And he worked a day job. He worked for the lighting company, and then he played his club dates on the weekend. And he had played with all the bands back in the '40s, but he was an old school tenor. And he had that big,
type.
He had that big Coleman Hawkins sound,
Yeah.
And he didn't improvise. So I would get my scales and stuff, the book stuff, and then the rest of the time I'd be, putting records on and trying to copy all of these guys on the records, mainly Getz and like as you said, and Lester Young, because then my father was a hip guy, and he told me that Stan Getz came from Lester Young. If you listen to Lester, you can hear where Stan, and he of course he was right, and I could hear that. Even as a young, I could hear where he had come from. So that was basically the beginning.
So that
but
was
always putting records on and blowing my brains out with these records, man.
So then, did you have like a mentor? Let's say that when you started to play, well, you were always playing jazz because you came to it from that. But so you were you came from Long Island.
Yes.
Family. So you're a native New Yorker in that way.
Yes, exactly right. Yep.
And what did your dad do, by the way?
He was a graphic artist. He was a commercial artist, and he worked for ad agencies and stuff like that in New York. He's talented. He drew real good. He was a creative kind of guy,
And you had brothers and sisters, or
I have a younger sister, but she's not she's not a musician. She still lives in Long Island too.
And did your mother work, or was she?
My mother worked in the school for the school system, and she loved Frank Sinatra. So I was pretty lucky. And both my mother and father had really good taste in
That's funny. My mother too was crazy about Sinatra.
She used to cut school and go see him at the Paramount, and all that.
My mother too.
Yeah.
Was crazy about Sinatra, and I had all these Sinatra records. And in fact, with me, the first thing I did, I was deep into rock and roll personally.
Yeah.
And I had a buddy, a best friend named Harold.
Yeah. So you told my mom. Yeah, mom was.
She was deep into Sinatra, and I was really into rock and roll, playing guitar and doing all this with my best friend named Harold. And to make a long story short, Harold got hit by a car and died.
Oh no!
When I was 12, I think almost 12, and Harold was a year older than me. And I'd moved to Florida from Massachusetts. In fact, he was about to come down and visit me. But when he died, I couldn't listen to the rock and roll or play guitar anymore. We really thought we were the Everly Brothers. We could sing all the harmonies, and and we did Little Richard, and You know,
Oh, you were a rock and roller coming
I
up,
was a
huh?
rock and roller, man, and
Nice.
my mother used to say that Harold and I would have been the Beatles, or the Beatles already came out in '64. We heard
Yes.
them here, but we would have been the Beatles of our generation because we were starting to write some songs together and
Yeah.
kind of thing. But when he died, I couldn't even listen to that music anymore.
Really?
Yeah,
Wow.
it was so sad. I just get really depressed by it, and I felt nobody understood it. I mean, I'd never even had a pet that died, so I had
That's heavy. No, that's heavy,
it
man.
was devastating, you know. And so
Yeah.
then when I heard Prez, that's what happened. Sinatra and Lester Young
Wow.
and Billie Holiday were three things that made me feel these people understand. There's
They
something
gave
that
you a deep. That's interesting, man.
you know
That's
the
really
kind of feeling. There was something
sure.
in Prez and in Sinatra and Billy
Yeah.
that made me feel that they had known this kind
That
of love.
they knew that kind of suffering. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah, and
Sure.
they could put joy in the music to kind of transcend it.
Well, you so wow, yeah, that really spoke to you then. Wow, that's really at a very young age, man. That's pretty. That's
So I started to sing these tunes, and I learned
yeah.
all these standards. You know, I mean everything. I mean a lot of the Sinatra songs for young lovers, songs for swinging lovers,
I
Nick
had all.
Beatty,
She
the
had
whole record, one
all
after
those
another,
all
the whole
those
thing, and
capital.
also the
Yep,
Billie Holiday stuff with Prez
yep,
and Teddy Wilson, and also the Frankie Newton stuff with Billy, and
yeah,
you know some of the late they had a lot of Billie Holiday, and also June Christie and Morgana Kagan. I
yeah,
listened to everything.
yeah.
I would sing for the neighbors. I had this beautiful voice, and you know, anyway, I'm interviewing myself here, but you know, anyway, my voice changed,
Yeah,
and I started to play the saxophone because it was the closest thing to the voice.
right.
I couldn't sing anymore. I started sounding like the Little Rascals, you know. But you know, so your mother, I'm just saying, was a Sinatra fanatic
Oh,
too. So you grew up hearing these tunes,
oh yeah.
and
Very, very young. I knew all of these songs, man. And yeah, you well, I don't know. In New York, there was a radio station, WNEW AM. They played Sinatra and they played Nancy Wilson, Billy Eckstine, Basie all day long. That they had a show called the Make Believe
Make
Ballroom with
Believe Ballroom.
William B. Williams, and that was the chairman of the board. And that radio was on in my house all day long.
Oh,
So I heard all of these Vic Damone and Matt Monroe and all these great singers,
right.
besides Tony Bennett, Ella Fitzgerald,
It was
everybody.
obscure at the
So I
time.
knew
Yeah, I mean,
I heard these songs from a very, very young age. So I knew them before. So when I started learning on the saxophone, they talk about learning lyrics. I knew the way the melodies. I could pick up the melodies pretty good, to these songs.
so you came from the lyrics as well.
Yeah, oh, most definitely,
That gives you that warmth in your playing. You know,
Yeah, yeah,
you don't
I think
sound like
so.
one thing. You don't sound like a conservatory guy.
No, I'm
You
not.
know, I mean, you sound like
Yeah,
the music is deeper in
yeah,
your heart than that.
could be. Yeah,
You know,
could
at
be.
first I tended to dismiss you incorrectly. When I first heard you, I said, "Oh, he's doing that kind of organ trio, kind of Texas tenor thing." And
Yeah,
then when I listened to you deeper, I said, there's something else going
yeah.
on there." You know, it was my
Oh
fault.
yeah,
I kind of gave it a superficial ear.
right.
And I heard that, hey, Jerry Weldon's got some depth. There's really, so this gives me an idea of
Yeah.
that
Oh,
comes
yeah.
from.
That's where. Yeah, I guess that's probably where it came from. Sure, sure,
Yeah, because you can
sure.
really play a ballad, which is like a lot of people are in a hurry to double time it.
Right.
You know, or to a friend of mine who was black, by the way, used to say, you know, these guys, they just want to take a beautiful song and put it in the jungle. And like,
Yeah, yeah,
you know, and,
yeah,
you
yeah.
know, the idea.
Well, then I from there, then it's funny. There were two incidents that happened early on with me, and they were both at the Vanguard. I had heard like I said, my father had taken me to the Vanguard when I was 14. It was the first time in a club. I'd been to the concerts,
Oh,
I'd been
yeah.
to the outside, concert, library concerts, all that stuff. But this was the first time in the club, and I heard Stan in 1972. I was 14, and I sat up in the front, and I was literally in the bell of his horn, so I got to hear him in person, and it just made that really sealed the deal for me. That did it. You know that.
That's funny. So you and I, we have another point of solidarity there. I was
Yeah,
13,
yeah,
decided I wanted to play the saxophone.
yeah.
At that moment,
I had
Stan,
already been playing. I had already been playing a very short time, but that really sealed the deal. Just to hear him, and George Cable's he used to sub for Kenny Barron with Stan,
oh,
the first time he went to his house, Stan called him over. He said, "Let's run through a few tunes, before." And George sat down and started to play, and Stan started to play, and George said to himself, "Man, sounds just like Stan Getz." So I know what he meant, and I to hear him in person, it was just like, wow, that's the way he sounds. Except you could hear the air coming through the horn. And I'll tell you what people don't realize too. He had a big sound, man.
oh yes, he did.
Stan had a big, beautiful sound. You know what I mean? So
Yeah.
that
Well, the next time I really got to see Stan, because he had this amazing memory, was he was staying at this little hotel called the Ocean Shore, I think, and
yeah,
we were living on Miami Beach. My family, we were actually poor people in Miami Beach. There were still
right,
these apartments in
yeah,
Surfside, the Holland Manor, it was called.
yeah,
And there were mice, and there were people said, "How could you be poor in Miami Beach? Your daddy must have owned a hotel." No, there were. It's like
yeah.
that movie Down and Out in Beverly Hills.
Oh, yeah.
That's Natasha Leone. That was my sister said, "Hey, that's us. This is our
Nice,
childhood." So
nice.
it was
Yeah,
like that. So Stan was staying down the street. I found that out from one of the Beach Boys, the cabana managers, they call them Beach Boys, that worked at the. They said, "Hey, Stan Getz is at my place. He rented the penthouse of
yeah.
this inexpensive motel." And there he was. And I ran and said, "Stan." And he said, "Oh, my man, how are you?" And I told him
How many years had passed
this
since?
was the same year.
Oh,
I'd
okay.
met him in September,
Yeah,
and I'd started to play on September 25th, I think. His concert was the 24th, and that was 1965. And now October, November, December. This was around January of the next year, so it was 4 or 5 months.
66, not too
I,
long. Yeah,
I'd only
yeah,
been
yeah,
playing the horn for a few months,
yeah,
so I told him that I was playing saxophone, and he was funny. He said, "Oh, Roy Haynes going to have your ass." He said he was saying you were going to be a good drummer, and which I wasn't
oh,
going to be, but he said, "So what kind of horn do you have?" And I was just down the street, so I ran over and I got my school horn, which was a Martin, which wasn't a
nice.
good Martin. It was a
Yeah,
funky Martin. And I had gotten, an aunt had given me $35 for this horn I found in a pawn shop on Flagler Street. So I got an
yeah,
alto. And Stan, I brought him over and he tried both of them. He played my horns. And I had an auto link mouthpiece. I had a good teacher, Teddy Rosen, who told me to get uh, a link for the tenor, which is I was playing more of that. And I just started to play the alto. And Stan said, "Oh yeah, you need better horns." And
yeah.
this he said, "Do you want to play alto or tenor?" And I said, "Well, I think I want to play alto because they say you should start with alto. It's more of a foundation. And I think if I played tenor, I'd just try to copy you. And even though I love
Ah,
Charlie Parker, I'd probably try to copy him, but there might be more room. I don't know. I think maybe I
yeah,
should play alto."
yeah, yeah.
And Stan said, "Well, I got several horns. I got an alto at home in New York." He said, "I'd love to send you an alto." So I said, "You're going to send
Wow.
me a horn?" He said, "Yeah." And I'm telling the whole story, but the I told my mother that we really didn't have money and everything, and then he sent for 4 of his 5 kids down to hang out with him for a few days at the Governess. They had a suite, it was the largest hotel
Yeah, yeah,
room there in the motel, and I hung out with him for the next. He was there for about 10 days, and we spent money we didn't have, taking his kids to lunch and doing. My mother got credit, and all this, and my mother was very attractive, and she was divorcing my father. They were separated.
Yeah.
He had some eyes for my mother too, which is another story. But they kind of had a friendship. They became, in fact, how would I try to say? Well, the nice part of the story, the horn never arrived.
Oh,
It
yeah.
never happened. But I did meet him later in life. And well, I'll tell you, the part I wanted to tell you was that while we were hanging out for those 10 days, and I was 13 years old,
Yeah.
and just started playing, he said, please come over and see me anytime you want. Just make sure I'm alone. You got to ask the desk if I've got anybody up here, because I might have a lady.
Yeah.
I do like women. And I said, okay, that's cool. I understand that. Me too.
That's fair enough.
And then he teased me about my being cherry, my being a virgin, and
Oh,
being
wow.
13
Yeah, yeah.
and shy. I had not had much opportunity for that area of life.
Yes.
But he was cool with it. And he'd say, well, if you want, he said, you can practice on my horn. So he let me play his horn to practice on. And he
Wow.
sat out on the patio with a bucket of Chinese spare ribs and a bottle of scotch and
There you
a pack
go.
of Marlboros. And he was in
That's
underwear all day long. He never changed from his white BVDs. And then he had a dress shirt. And sometimes he didn't have anything because he was out in the sun.
yeah.
And one time he said, my mother came over and made a chicken. And he said, excuse me while I dressed for dinner. And he came back with a dress shirt on over his underpants. He still didn't put pants on. But I mean,
Hey man, you got a real rare glimpse into the backstory, man. That's very, very hip, man.
but he told me two very important things about three
Yeah.
things
Yeah.
playing the saxophone.
What's that?
One thing was when you're talking about the air,
Yeah.
he said, you've got to remember saxophone sound is made of sound and air. And the amount of air in your sound is part of what determines your individuality.
Yeah.
He said, so when you listen to cats play the saxophone, listen for how they use the air in their sounds.
Yeah.
He says, for instance, Coleman Hawkins and Lester Young use different kinds of air.
Definitely.
Air differently. Coltrane and I use air differently.
Right.
But we have some similarity. You'll always, a good saxophone sound, you hear this little stream of air in
There
it.
you go.
He said, classical saxophone, you don't always hear that because they're trying to imitate string instruments. He said, but what makes
Very interesting. Yeah.
makes the jazz sound
Yeah.
is that we do use the air in the sound.
There you go.
And he told me about that. Another time we were listening to, I played him a record with Ira Sullivan. He was friends with Ira. And I was friends with Ira. Ira was the next guy I met.
Yeah.
And there's a beautiful record called Bird Lives with Ira Sullivan and the Chicago Jazz Quintet with a tenor player by the name of Nicky Hill.
Oh yes, I know this record. Yes, yes. Nicky Hill, yes.
And I figured you would.
Jody Christian, is that Jody Christian and Wilbur Campbell? Is that the record I'm thinking
Wilbur
of?
Campbell, right, or Darrell Anderson and Victor
They play on the Alamo. They play on the Alamo.
Yeah, well, that was the second record that came out. They finally released that stuff.
Yeah, I love that.
40 years later, but on the original,
it was just a few years.
But that record, right? I figured you would know that record. Millions,
yes,
but you would.
Yes.
But anyway, I played this record of Nicky Hill. There's a version of Fly Me to the Moon, and I wanted to see what. Oh yeah, Stan. When I knew he was going to stay for 10 days, I brought up my record player.
Yeah.
And I folded one of those fold-up stereos.
Yeah, I had one of those. Yeah.
And I lent it to him. I let him keep it in his room, in his motel room. And I gave him about 10 or 15 records. And the record he listened to the most was Sinatra with Strings.
Really?
With the Don Costa arrangements. He played that record incessantly. Almost every time I came on, he was listening to that record.
Yeah.
So he was listening to that. And then I played him this Nicky Hill stuff. And I said, what do you think of that kind of playing, that kind of sound?
Yeah.
He said, well, he's a fine saxophone player. And you see, he's a master of the air sound. I said, the air sound? He said, yeah, saxophones have basically, you could be eh or ooh. He said, for instance, like Coltrane, is an and, and a great and. He said Coleman Hawkins is more of an and. Lester Young was the quintessential ooh. He said, and I come from that, as the
He sure does.
and Al and these guys were ooh.
Yeah.
So this Dickie Hill is wonderful, but he's more of an and I could hear that. Years later, when I told Lee Koditz that story, Lee looked at me quizzically like he would, and he said, what about ah?
Well, you knew he'd have another take on it.
Yeah, Lee always had another take on everything. So, did you get to know Lee at all?
I knew him not well, but I would run into him a few times. In fact, the last couple of times I ran into him at Dizzy's, and he sat with us, with me and my wife. It was a very funny story. He just kind of sat down at our table, and he had a few beers with us, and then he ran up and scat sang with Charles McPherson. He just got up out of the audience and got up, and Charles McPherson was playing Embraceable You, and he got up, waited till Charles was done, and grabbed the mic and scattered two
Yeah, he loves to do
choruses
that.
on
He loves
Embraceable You, and came back and sat down at the
yeah,
table with us.
towards the end, he did that
He was a kooky guy.
without even being. Well, he was more kooky toward the end because he was
Yeah,
older.
yeah,
But he always liked scat singing. In fact, I would for many years, Lee and I would get on the phone,
yeah,
and sometimes he'd say, "Hey, how about a couple choruses of Stella, for instance?" And he'd
yeah,
go, "Boop boop, bip
yeah, yeah.
and we'd trade fours,
Oh, you try. Oh, that's good,
adding
cool, man.
fours and eights, and
Yeah,
just singing. That was part of our relationship.
sure.
But Konitz, well, your mentors, were there cats along
Yes,
the way that you kind of that
Paul Jeffrey. You remember Paul
Oh,
Jeffrey?
of course, yeah.
He was the guy, and he took good. He really looked out for me, and he was a big influence on my life, and a huge mentor. Absolutely, no question about it. And
Yeah, Paul was an absolutely beautiful person.
I played in many of. I met so many guys through him, and he had a band. He led a band at Colin Studios back in the '70s that we play on Saturday afternoons, and then they'd have jam sessions at night. Hal Galper had a studio over there at the time, and he knew a lot of the Mingus guys. I met Danny Richmond, and I met Bob Nelms, and all of those cats. I'm talking mid '70s, '76, '77. Then I wound up at Rutgers with him at school, and I
You
learned.
wound up in what school? I'm sorry.
What's that?
What was the last thing you said? I didn't hear it clearly.
I went to school. He got the job teaching at Rutgers, and he brought and I came down with him. He brought me down to study with him at Rutgers, and I played in the band there, and he was a big influence.
Didn't Kenny Barron also teach at
Yep,
Rutgers?
Kenny Barron, Ted Dunbar, Freddie Waits. It was a great, and it wasn't. You said before I didn't sound like those conservatory cats because it wasn't that type of. The vibe was really a very much hipper type of vibe where it was rehearsing and playing. It was playing and rehearsing, and we'd have rehearsal in the afternoons, and at night I'd go home with him, and he'd sit up writing arrangements, and then he'd give me the score, and I'd have to copy all the parts out for the band.
Ah.
And I had a very good hand, and I got a lot of as he did too. He was a copyist as well.
Oh,
And
I didn't realize that.
And he noticed I had a good hand at copying, and he said, you can make some money doing this, copying music for guys, and so I did. I worked for a lot of guys. He introduced me to Gil Evans. I met Sonny Rollins through Paul.
Yeah, he and Sonny were close.
And so I he was it was a big thing he was a big part of my life for sure.
I met Paul in 1973 when I was playing with Mingus at what was the 5 spot, but it was called Two Saints for tax purposes, I think, at that time. But it was still, Mingus never called it that. He always called it the 5 spot.
Right.
And Paul would come down. Paul was the copyist
Yeah.
for a lot of things that Mingus did, and also arranged a few things. And there was a tune called Mingus Low Slow Blues, and that was Paul Jeffrey's copy. And I remember
Yeah.
seeing how clear,
Yeah.
what a great copy job it was.
Great. He was a great. So I sort of got it. I sort of used. I sort of copied his copy. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
I
and
used
the
his.
transcription was also perfect, you know. And Paul would come down, and he was very he was very nice to me
Yeah.
because Mingus was such an erratic temperament.
Sure.
There were nights when Mingus was like mad at me for no apparent thing that I'd done. He just felt like getting mad at somebody, and I was it. And
You were playing. You were playing alto.
yeah,
And who else? Who else was in the band at that time?
that was George Adams was playing tenor,
Oh,
and Don Pullen was playing piano.
you said in '73.
Yes,
Wow. Okay.
and Roy Brooks was playing drums because
Oh,
Danny
I love
was
Roy
with
Brooks.
Mark Almond, this British rock band, who gave him an offer he couldn't refuse.
I remember that. Danny, you told my Danny. Yeah, Danny. They made him an offer. Sure, he went out with them for a couple of
And
years,
that's
right?
when we had Roy Haynes. And
Yeah.
Pullen and I did not get along. That's largely
Okay.
one of the reasons that I left. That that Mingus told me if he fired Pullen, then George would go, and if he got rid of me, then only I left. And
So it was you and George in the front line.
yeah, but there were other people came in, a couple of trumpet players. One guy named Charles McGee,
I remember Charles McGee. Sure.
and then a guy named Ron Hampton. He came in. He's even on one of the records.
Yeah.
And they weren't very strong trumpet players. They're nice cats.
Yeah.
They had, I mean, Lonnie played a little bit.
Lonnie Hillier.
Yeah, a little bit. And
Yeah.
he was my good friend.
Yeah.
I'd known him from before, from the first time I sat in with Mingus,
Yeah.
which was in 1969.
Sure.
But then he also had Howard Johnson would come by
Right.
and sit in with us on tuba. And that was beautiful. I mean, that really was nice when Howard came by.
Yeah.
But and both Howard and Paul, who never sat in with us or anything, but he was there listening.
Yeah.
And both of them would console me when Mingus was going out on me.
It was.
They
Well,
said,
you were right in the fire. You were in the fire there. You were
I
right.
was in the fire,
Yeah.
and you know there were. Yeah, I mean it was not easy. You know, I'm not going to go into it, but I did meet Paul at that time. I found him really
Yeah. Well.
beautiful cat. Also, Paul and I had a mutual student that went out and became a Mooney. We both were trying to find him. He didn't show up for either of our lessons, and it wasn't easy to track down people in those days. There weren't any cell phones or anything.
Became a Mooney. Wow.
Yeah, I got a call from Paul, and he said, "Have you seen Richie?" And I said, "No, I was just going to call you. Have you seen him?" And it turned out he got literally kidnapped. He met these people, and they brought him up somewhere in the mountains and talked to him and kept him awake.
Yeah.
And then next thing you knew,
That's the 70s there, baby.
that was the 70s.
Yeah.
But Paul and I kind of became friends.
Yeah.
I mean, we were friends on Mingus's thing, but also discussing this mutual student, and who'd become a good friend to both of us.
Yeah.
Individually, he wasn't just a student. You know what I mean? He was somebody we cared
Well,
about.
Paul was the guy that really kind of, was encouraging in the sense that he made me feel like I really had a shot at really doing this. Becoming really becoming a musician for real. For the on the real side.
On the real side, yeah.
So
he
was great. He was great. I think about him all the time. Still, he was a very big part of my life.
So how long did you stay at Rutgers? And
81. I left in 81.
When did you start?
78. I went there in 78.
So you went for just about 3 years.
Yeah, 3 years. I finished there, and going back to the other thing, a couple. So after 4 years or 70, I guess I saw Guests at the Vanguard 72. I saw Dexter in 76 when he came back from Europe, and he had the big home. when he had the big homecoming thing.
I remember that.
Remember he played that and so I was at the Vanguard one of those nights when they recorded the record, and I got to hear Dexter in person, and then that was the sound that really, you know what I mean? You talk about two great sounds. That made a big impression on me too. So from there on, I was trying to sound like Dexter Gordon. You know what I mean? That was my guy. You know.
Yeah, well, that could be. He was definitely larger than life. You know,
in every imaginable way, as you know.
You know, Chad Parker told me a great Dexter story.
Yeah.
That I mean, I may have told this on this show before. I'm not sure what I'd say, but I think you'd love this story. I love it. When he did the movie, the Round Midnight movie,
Sure.
he was there's a scene, the first scene, where the character Dale Turner, the name of the character,
yes,
he plays as time goes by.
Right.
And the first take, Chad says Dexter played so beautifully that she almost ruined it by shouting out, "Yeah, Dex!" And of course, it wasn't Dex; it was Dale.
Right.
She fortunately stopped herself before she did that, and everybody was congratulating him. Said, "Excuse me, what a great take it was." And Dexter says, "I think I'd like to try another take." They said, "Why? What you played was beautiful. There's really no need for it." He says, "Yes, there is." They say, "Why?" And this is where Dexter should have gotten that Academy Award.
Definitely.
Like method acting, dig what happened. He says, the situation is that the character, Dale, hasn't been playing in public very frequently. This is his first performance in public in a while. And so he should be a little bit rusty.
Wow.
At first, and he should work his way into sounding more confident. He said, I played it more as Dexter Gordon. I've been playing a lot since I've been back, and I came in confident and strong, which is not the way the character would start out. I want him to
wow. That's pretty hip.
Yeah. Isn't that hip?
Very hip. No, he was so great. He should have got the Oscar that year, man. I'm a big fan of the movie, and I was, so getting to hear getting to hear that sound in person, which I did many, because he was in New York all the time after that. So I got to hear that. I got to hear that sound in person. So that was, that had a big impact on me.
What about Sonny Rollins?
Oh,
you had to see
of course. I got to hear Sonny quite a bit. I got to know him pretty good too, actually.
Go ahead, son. Let's say that you got to hear Sonny quite a bit.
I got to hear him quite a bit, sure, and I got to know him, through Paul. I did some copying for him for that saxophone concerto that he recorded in Japan. A guy from Finland had written this concerto for Sonny Rollins to play, and I got the copy. David Schumacher, another great friend of mine, a great baritone saxophone, who, by the way, we binged on your show on the way to Chicago. That's
oh, thank you. Wow.
We watched all your. We watched George Coleman. We watched Ron McClure. We watched Abe Burton, Dave Schnitter, Hal Galper.
Wow, you went through the gamut.
We're big. I'm telling you, Bob, we're big fans. You got a lot of fans out here.
Thank you.
But Sonny was, still is. I mean, he's a huge influence on me too. And Tenor Madness. I mean, that's how I learned how to play. Putting that record on, playing Tenor Madness over and over and over. I can talk about singing the record, singing the solos. That's that's a must.
Right, that's a must as well. Yeah, that's on your.
It is a must. I have a question for you, Bob. You had Gary Smolian on recently.
Yeah.
And he talked about that night that you met him. He wanted to sit in with Chet when you were on the band with Chet out in Long Island. So that would have been
Sunday Lounge.
Was it that? I was there. I wasn't there that night, but I caught you at that place. And for years I couldn't remember. I knew it wasn't Sonny's place. And I remember it was out in Long Island. I was still in high school. So this had to have been what, 74, 73?
I would say either 74, 75.
Probably. 75, maybe it was 75. But as I recall, I don't remember, there was no drummer the night I was there.
No, because Chet sometimes, when the bread, which these little clubs didn't pay that well,
Yeah,
when it called for a quartet, he would hire me instead of drums
right.
because he was still having his denture problems. And also, he liked the stimulation of playing counterpoint
Oh,
with
with
another
the two
horn.
horn. Yeah,
And
yeah, yeah.
he, like me, a lot of the horn players that he would have didn't really play good counterpoint with him. They could
Okay.
be strong soloists, but they didn't really understand counterpoint. And I think because I'd done a lot of that with Lee Konitz,
Yeah.
um, I always had an inclination toward it, and
Yeah. No, it was
so he liked that. So, but also he was economic. There's
yeah,
also two
yeah.
reasons. Chet didn't like loud drummers.
I know.
He in fact sometimes he brought it. He'd bring a snare drum and brushes on the road, so he would play drums behind you.
Oh,
I
really?
played some gigs in Europe with him with the snare drum and brushes, and
Nice.
he was good brother. He could swing.
He could swing.
Yeah, and
Could it have been Harold Danko on piano?
yeah, it was Harold Danko and possibly Victor Sproles or Cameron Brown
I think it was Cameron Brown.
or Dave Shapiro. It probably might have
Wasn't I don't think it was. No, I knew Dave Shapiro. It was probably because I thought it might have been Cameron Brown. This is
yeah,
yeah,
if it was a white cat, it was probably Cameron
yeah.
Brown or Dave.
It was probably Cameron
Yeah,
Brown.
'cause-
But yeah, that made it. That was early on too. But I remember that night. I remember it well, and you guys really sounded made a big impression on me. And I've been for years. I couldn't remember the name of that spot, the Someday Lounge. Wow.
Someday Lounge. Yeah,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
a lot of great people played there. I didn't. I found when I was going through my memorabilia a couple of years ago, I ran into a flyer for the Someday Lounge, and it looked like a who's who of jazz.
Oh, really?
All the cats that played there,
I did.
just
Yeah, because I grew up out there, in that area. But Sonny's, I was out at Sonny's all the time, but
yeah, well, that was the other place I
that
played
was the
there
other
a lot
that
too.
was the spot. And Gary was already headlining out there at Sonny's, in those days. He's a year or so. He's a year older than me, but
Uh,
his playing was. You
yeah,
good?
well, Gary was my first student
Yeah,
in New York. I had taught elsewhere, but I was 22 and Gary was about 18 or
yeah,
17, and
yeah. Well, Gary, I'll tell you what, Gary he doesn't know it, but he had a big coming up. He's a year older than me, but he played like he was way older than me. He was already playing bebop, and he sounded like Bird.
he was playing alto at that time.
Yeah, he was playing
He played a lot
alto.
like Phil Woods, as I
He was
recall. That was
playing
his.
his ass off, and we wound up at a session, and I was still in my Stan Getz thing, you know what I mean? But Gary was, as far as playing, I mean, he was already bebopping through the changes. I was still, I was playing by ear, and I was still not on his level. But
So Gary was an alto player.
so Gary was alto player, and he was already like bebopping. This guy was playing, and I already knew about him, so I was already a little bit, intimidated because he was on a whole nother level, man. And I'm trying to hang. And so we finished one tune. We finished the tune, played a couple of tunes, and he stops and he says to the guitar player, he says, "Hey, Steve," his buddy Steve, the guitar. He points at me. He doesn't look at me. He points at me. He goes, "Hey, this guy sounds like Zeus Sims."
Oh, that's great.
So I was I was going for Getz, but Zoot, I'll take Zoot. Zoot's
Yeah,
cool.
Zoot is good.
At least at least I knew I was at least in the ballpark. You know what I mean?
Did you get to hear Zoot? He was.
Oh, of course. I love Zoot, man. I
Have you
got
heard him
to,
live as well?
oh, many times, of
Yeah,
course. Sure.
Falcone.
I didn't get to know him like I wanted to, because he was a real character, you know what I mean? He used to hang out at the China Song. You remember the China Song?
I remember the China Song in Midtown. I used to hang out at the China Song with Al Cohn and Al's father,
Yeah.
who was a comedian, who had been a comedian.
Oh, well, that makes perfect sense.
Yeah, Joe's grandfather. You know,
Oh,
and he
Joe.
and
Oh,
his dad.
Joe's a good pal of mine. Boy. I just love Joe. Man. We played in Al Gray's band together,
Oh, okay.
and Joe's one of my favorite people in the
He's the
world.
gem.
He's
There, there's not two of them.
we that's a show right there, man.
That's it, complete and in himself. Yep. No admission. Just right. He's right there the whole show. But Alan, his father, his father had all these great one-liners, and that's where all those great.
Oh well, now it makes perfect sense now. Yeah,
Yeah.
I wish I'd that. That's funny. I didn't know that. His father was an old vaudeville guy, right?
Right. And the
Yeah.
Al had all these great little one-line things. The guy on the ledge with an alto.
Oh, that I heard you tell that story about Bird Lives, don't you?
Yeah, that's an Alcone.
we, were, we were backstage. You and I played it years ago. We played at the Highline Ballroom, some kind of benefit.
For the tsunami victims of Japan.
And we were in the back, just BSing, waiting to go on. And you told the great, yeah, don't jump, don't Bird Lives, don't jump.
Yeah, right. Who's Bird? Jump. Yeah, that was.
Oh,
Yeah, he had Yeah, well, there was
that's pretty funny. Well,
yeah,
yeah,
those guys
no,
were amazing.
they were great. They were great. I got to hear this. So yeah, we were lucky, Bob. We got to hear a lot of these guys in person, and that's I'm glad we came up when we did.
Yeah. So what was Sonny? I mean, I've gotten to know Sonny pretty well through the years.
Yeah.
Um,
I got to know him. Like I said, I copied some of that music for the concerto that he did many years back in the '80s. In fact, Paul hooked me up with that, and it's funny because I was glad I wasn't home when he called me for the gig. Because we had the old answering machines. He said, "This is Sonny Rollins." So I thought it was one of my friends playing a joke on me.
I also had a similar experience that way.
Yeah.
Mike Wolf used to like to call me up.
Yeah.
Hey, Bob, it's Sonny, and this and that, and one day, I think Mike had done that recently at that time.
Yeah.
And the phone rang, and it's like, "Hey, it's Sonny," and I'm like, "Mike,
Yeah.
enough is enough already.
The jig's up. Yeah.
Yeah, that's enough. I mean, that's it was funny at first. I think maybe we might be overdoing it. No, it's Sonny.
It's
It was
really
funny. Yeah,
it
it was
was really
really good.
Sonny. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
So
He's a big baseball fan too, Sonny.
yeah,
We used to talk. We used to talk about the Mets because at that time they were good. That was in '86, '87.
uh-huh.
But yeah, I was glad I got to know him a little bit, man. You start off listening to these records, and then you meet these guys in person, and then you get to be friends with some of them. It blows my mind sometimes, and it really.
Yeah, I had the same feeling. I was just
Yeah.
like, I mean, we're friends. When my daughter was
Yeah.
born, he sent flowers, and
Yeah.
we
It's beautiful. Yes, sure.
you know.